everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Alex, and I am the Manager of Education and Public Programs here at Aperture. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to a conversation with two incredibly talented artists, Diana Markosian and Abdul Kircher, presented by Aperture and the British Journal of Photography and moderated by Dalia Al-Dujaili. In Markosian's Father, published by Aperture, and Kircher's Rotting from Within, published by Loose Joints, both artists contend with complex family histories through intimate and observational photographs. For those of you who might not be familiar with Aperture, we're a nonprofit publisher that leads conversations around photography worldwide. From our base in New York, Aperture connects global audiences and supports artists through our acclaimed publications and programming. 1854 Media is a multi-award-winning digital media organization with a global community, including millions of photographers, art lovers, and international brands. Their portfolio includes the British Journal of Photography, the world's oldest photography title, established in 1854, and their awards are among the most viewed photographic exhibitions in history. To briefly introduce our speakers today, Dalia Al-Dujaili is a British-born Iraqi writer, editor, and producer based in London and is the online editor of the British Journal of Photography. She writes about creativity from the Southwest Asian and North African region and its diaspora. She's the founder of The Road to Nowhere magazine and author of Babylon Albion, A Personal History of Myth and Migration, and has written for The Guardian, Dazed, GQ, Aperture, Atmos, Service 95, and more. Abdul Kircher is an artist from Queens, New York. He was born in Berlin to German and Turkish parents and immigrated with his mother to the United States at the age of 8. His work is a living archive of place and people, while also a dedication to the language, mechanics, and aesthetic possibilities of photography. He received his BA in Culture and Media from the New School and his MFA in Visual Arts from the University of California, San Diego. Kircher currently lives and works between Berlin and Los Angeles in New York. Diana Markosian is among the leaders of a new generation of photographers and lens-based artists advancing documentary storytelling through image making. Her photographs have been published in Vanity Fair, Vogue, and The New Yorker. The artist's acclaimed first monograph, Santa Barbara, published by Aperture in 2020, was selected as one of the top books as the top book of the year by Time and Museum of Modern Art magazine. She holds an MS from Columbia University in New York. Our speakers will be able to answer audience questions towards the end of the program, so feel free to post your questions using the Q&A feature throughout the conversation. Thank you all again for tuning in today, and I will now pass it over to Dalia and our speakers.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. For me, it's this evening, and for everyone across the pond, it's this afternoon. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Alex, for such a wonderful introduction. I'm super excited to introduce these two artists today. I'm going to give both Abdul and Diana 5 minutes each to just quickly go through their projects with us before I jump into some questions, and then everyone will have some time to ask some questions at the end of the talk as well. I think, first of all, I'll just hand over to Abdul, if I'll get up the presentation for us, and then Abdul can go ahead and... Okay, Abdul, would you like to introduce your project? Just give a quick little overview, and then I'll hand over to Diana.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My book is titled Rotting from Within, and it spans a decade from 2014 to 2024, surrounding my father and various family members between Berlin and Turkey. And it's sort of I think it's sort of exploring generational trauma. And I always find it a bit difficult to give a clear-cut sort of explanation of the book, because I think it started from a very instinctive place. And it sort of began when my father and I reconnected when I was about 17, which was around the same time I had started making photographs. And photography sort of became a way for me to, build a bond with this person that wasn't, in my life for most of my life. And over time, it sort of became this way of retracing you know, the relationship between my father and I, but also the relationships between him and his father and his family members. And yeah, I feel like that's sort of the gist of it. We're obviously going to get into more of it as we speak later.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go back to the beginning for Diana's photos. And Diana, could you just give us a brief overview as well of father?
Um, I guess for me, father is similar to Abdul's time frame. I started documenting my father in 2014 and finished the project in 2024, so a decade as well. And it's about finding a missing man and trying to rebuild a relationship and spending a decade working through the loss, the sadness, the grief, the joy, all these emotions, and trying to piece together who this man is in my life today. So it's been quite a journey in really understanding um, how to make sense of the past and how to move forward with the things that I've learned and kind of the cards that were dealt in my story. And I think so much of this has been about acceptance and trying to create work that reflects that emotion, but also how do you bring in joy into this story? And how do you find space for yourself today in this story? So many years later, I think um, that's often the hardest part of time. You're trying to make up for it today. And I think that's, in essence, what this project has been for me, is trying to make up for lost time.
Absolutely. We can go back to the images. If you have any specific images you'd like me to reference, I can bring up the slideshow again. So do let me know. I think on a personal note, I just wanted to start from a place of saying that I find this pairing super interesting, and I'm super excited to get you both together, albeit in a digital room, but in a room together. I came across Abdul's book first, and then I came across Diana's very soon afterwards, and I was struck by how similar, obviously, the themes and the ideas are and the story was, but also how different the execution of the projects are. How Diana and Abdul have such different approaches to the very same subject matter. Both artists are working in diaspora, which I find very interesting, and both had to cross physical and emotional borders to make this work possible. I've spoken to both of you about your work before, and the thing that strikes me in both projects is the level of intimacy, despite the fact you were both estranged from your father for years. And Diana, you kind of ended on that note by saying that you're trying to make up for lost time. And Abdul, I know that a big part of your project was also an effort in part to make up for lost time and to reconnect a ruptured relationship. So I wanted to start by asking about how using the camera and using a lens as a means for connection allowed you to start rebuilding or even forging from the beginning this relationship. Abdul, you told me that the work began from a pure place, and you just said that this was very instinctual work, and just simply from wanting to spend time with your dad. Diana, equally, you told me that you were using photography to get to know a version of your father that you needed to exist in order to make the return journey. Can you each tell me about how photography allowed you to both cross the emotional and physical borders that existed between yourselves and your father? Abdul, it would be great if you could start us off.
Yeah. Um, for me, it's I think the camera, it's sort of, I don't know if it's like for me, the camera is very much a shield in a way, especially as time has passed and the relationship between my father and I has sort of gotten more toxic. I think the camera is a way for me to sort of like disappear from whatever's happening. And um I think it's sort of become like, in a way, it feels very therapeutic, but then it's also like I tend to not feel things in moments that are really emotional or traumatic. And then like reviewing them later on sort of brings about like almost like reliving this moment that I didn't even actually live through in a way because I wasn't present. Like when I'm looking through the viewfinder, I very much, especially because I'm shooting on film and, I think it becomes really, I just become so involved in the mechanics of the camera and of making an image that it really allows me to just like disappear from whatever is happening. Um, and obviously this is something I've become more conscious of as I've gotten older, but like when I first started making this work with my dad, that wasn't really something. I think the camera was, because in the beginning, like the relationship with my dad and it was much more like it felt like he wanted to get to know me, and it just felt healthier in a way because he just felt interested in me and in my life. And um the camera was a way for, him to show me the things in his life or the things I was interested in. And it was a way for us to bond. And I think over time it just became the camera became a sort of different tool for me to sort of deal with trauma. Um, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Diana, I know that you've said very similar things to me in the past when we've talked about your work. I wonder how you resonate with that.
I think to me, the camera's never been really a shield, but it's been almost the thing that I needed. It's been a friend. It's given me the courage, and it gave me almost the motivation to stay because I saw that it it helped me, and it gave me a language with my father that I didn't have. And we were editing together, we were looking at photos together, we were creating images together. It became just like a positive, um, almost like third party, it just became this language that we started speaking together. So to me, it's like I leaned on the craft of photography to allow me to stay and to be next to my dad when it felt like I wanted to run the most.
Absolutely. I mean, both of these projects are deeply, deeply personal and very vulnerable. And I hear what you're both saying in terms of, the camera's either the process to which you access your relationship with your father, or it's a shield to protect you from perhaps a traumatic relationship. And I wonder, I'm sure there's lots of photographers here today who are wondering how they work through that vulnerability. It's not easy. I wondered if you both kind of had, yeah, how you work through the vulnerability of being able to show, not only show work, but you produced entire books around this topic, around your relationship with your father. That can't be easy. How do you work around the fear of vulnerability? Maybe Diana, you could start us off.
Um, I think I remember publishing early images in 2014, and um, I received so many letters, and I just remember wanting to run away and not not confront any of it, and just thinking, how is this my story? I think I kept saying that to me. I'm more than this. I'm more than this story. I don't want to be defined by this story. And it's just like even saying that sentence, it just brings me back to finding my dad, it is vulnerable. Like there's no other way of uh framing it or even pretending that that's not that. But I think the biggest gift is going through that vulnerability, confronting it, and the pain lessens, a decade later. Like I feel like I have a very comfortable relationship with my dad, and he's a friend, and he is my father. But gosh, it took 10 years to get to a place that I can say that. And less really even about him, more about the circumstance and how the story played out.
Mhm.
So I would say about vulnerability, I think like it is vulnerable, and you have to exist in that space and that whatever those emotions are. And they also changed. Like I just remember even when I found my dad, it felt like this honeymoon phase of like this is the best thing that happened to me. And then suddenly it shifted, and it turned to disappointment because of other feelings, and it just ebbed and flowed. And I feel like there's been a consistent, maybe in the last 5 years of just like gratitude that we have each other, and however long we have, I'm just grateful that I have this person in my life. Um,
Mm. I I kind of want to ask the same question to Abdul, but also I want to add that I'm curious about what it's like to work with editors on your book, because they might be pushing you
hmm.
towards sharing a different narrative than to what you had in mind. Abdul, when you were making the book with Loose Joints, were there any images or kind of narrative where the editors were kind of pushing images that you weren't so comfortable with, or actually you wanted to get more vulnerable and they suggested a different approach? How do you work around sharing really vulnerable personal work alongside working with editors who are essentially trying to sell the body of work as well?
Yeah. Um, I mean, it's sort of like, I guess my one requirement was, so like throughout the 10 years, like I kept a diary, like whatever feelings I was having with my dad or things I was seeing or whatever, like those, I was writing all those things down into a diary. And I think before we really started editing the work, like I wanted them to just sit down and read everything that I had sort of written. Um, and then I came in with a very, I mean, not a tight edit, but I think the book has like 330 images or something, and I came to them with like an edit of like 500 that sort of had like it was laid out chronologically. And then we really, I think being there in person, like going to Marseille and sitting down with them and really engaging in the edit allowed us to, there were certain images that I wasn't thinking about, or vice versa, um, that I felt important, that maybe, weren't as strong like visually or something, but felt important to the narrative. Um, but yeah, I don't know. All these, do you still want me to answer the other question or no?
Yeah, I'm wondering about, I mean, your book in particular, I think, something I'm really interested in is addressing how different your bodies of work are in form. I think, Abdul, your work is particularly raw in a way that Diana's is not, is a little bit perhaps um, maybe quieter. I think your work is particularly vulnerable, and I wondered if there was ever fear or anxiety about showing work that is so raw, because it can't be easy for most people.
Yeah. I mean, even hearing Diana talk about like her relationship with her father, it almost not like, I think just if you even just think about the outcomes of both situations, like those things also become very evident in like the actual work, like I feel like Diana, you were maybe building a healthier relationship with your father, whereas mine was, it just was a constant struggle, and still to this day, like it's just such a toxic relationship for me that I struggle with, that I think that's sort of evident in the actual images. And um yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, it's like all these things, like doing these talks, making the book, working on the show, whatever has to do with this work. Like for me, I think the most important thing is that it feels like therapy to me. Like it, every time I do one of these talks, it feels like I'm just having like a sort of therapy session because I get to talk about my dad. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I try not to really think about like what happens. I mean, this is, I don't know if this sounds selfish, but like I when I'm making the work or putting it together or putting it out there, like for me, like I'm doing all those things like for myself. I'm not doing them because I'm trying to elicit a certain message or whatever, like to me, like I don't feel like, I don't know. I just don't feel comfortable with phrasing it that way. Um, because at the end of the day, this, you know, this is my life and this is my reality. And um, I obviously, if people connect to it and feel moved by it, like that makes me so happy and sort of grateful that I put it out there, but that is not why I put it out there.
I mean, it's hard to make work that isn't, I don't think the word selfish is always, needs to always have negative connotations. I feel like we, and Diana, I'm sure you feel the same way. When we make work, we need to put parts of ourselves in the work in order to be free from certain, I guess, yeah, pressures or certain feelings. And I think that both of your work could be seen as selfish in that way. And I think that can only be a strength in both projects, because you can really see yourselves in both, and you can also literally see yourselves in both. You have a lot of self-portraits with your fathers, which I find really interesting, and is actually something I want to ask about in a bit. I wanted to ask about your fathers as well, like how they were in the project. Diana, you said that you were editing some of the images alongside him. Abdul, I'm not sure that, I don't know if your relationship with your dad would have allowed for a kind of collaborative effort like that, but I know that in your short film of the same name, Rotting from Within, I can remember your dad yelling at you at one point for shooting his photo and apparently not engaging with him on a personal level. And Diana, similarly, you told me that your dad asked you to put down the camera at one point to get to know him, because you had been doing multiple trips. And at one point he said to you, if I'm not mistaken, can you put the camera down and let's get to know each other after so many years of shooting. I'm curious as to how they engaged in the project, and did they have any say in how they were shot? Because I think a lot of questions from people might be, well, what did the subject matter have? Like, what control does the subject matter have in a kind of body of work that is about them? And there is so much about them, but also so much about yourselves. Maybe Diana, you could start us off.
Yeah, my dad never told me to put down the camera. I think when I showed him the book at the end, he was just grateful I was finished, because he said, it's time that you get to know me outside of this, uh, this project you've been creating for a decade. And to me, that was so interesting to hear from him, because I thought, haven't I been doing this? I've been, I go to Armenia 3 times a year, that's not casual. I spend months there for the last 10 years. So for me, and not photographing, just hanging out, so for me, it was just such a interesting thing to hear him say. And he said, when I asked him, don't you think I've been doing that this past decade? And he goes, no, you've been seeing me through the framework of this book. And I thought how right my dad is, because this framework is safe for me. This framework has a beginning, middle, and end, and this framework is the one that I'm comfortable with. And anything beyond it is really vulnerable. Anything beyond it is actually a relationship that I need to confront. That's not an image, that's not text, that's just us. And I just think it's like such a gift to really have someone in your life that can help you see that as well. So to me, I don't take it as a critique. I think he's 100% right. But for me, I needed to create this body of work to be even in a position to have a relationship with him that is beyond the one that I had, And it's so tricky. We started this call saying that family is complicated. And to me, it's it's really complicated when I see my father be a father to his new daughter. It's complicated to see all the years now that she has that I didn't have, and you're constantly struggling with acceptance and grief and even joy that this man has this opportunity and this second chance, and where do I fit in today, so I really think this is a journey, and accepting different parts of it is part of it. And when it comes to photography, I think, and for me, this was the foundation to creating a relationship with him. And I'm just so grateful that I had that.
Mm. Abdul, does that echo any of your feelings and how your father kind of engaged in the project? And I'm curious, as a follow-up from that, how he feels towards it now.
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing her talk. Like, I don't know, there's so much overlap, and then there's so many like this the it feels so similar and then so different in many ways. And um
Well, we have two different dads.
I know, yeah. It's just yeah, also the time frame is like interesting. I mean, like just that it's the exact same time frame.
Hmm.
And my like my dad is such a uh he's such a narcissist that it's like it's impossible to like I feel like our relationship is at the same place where it almost, restarted. Like he's not, there's been no, I think, change in the way he behaves. And it's such a, like, for me, because I was going back every year in the summer, like it, there was such a big amount of time between those visits that every time I went back, I felt like, oh, this, like maybe he's different now. Maybe he's different now. And it's like this endless um vicious cycle of just like re-entering this traumatic space and like having to relive it every single time and like deep down thinking like, oh, like this is gonna be different this time. Like even recently my grandfather passed away, and it felt like, you know deaths in a way, they sort of bring people together. And I felt like we, like, when I was with my dad, it was like our first time like crying together, us hugging, like all these things that I had never felt before. And I was like, oh, like maybe this is gonna change. And then like by the end of that trip, like he was just the sort of he was just the exact same way he was before, just like berating me and just being a sort of terrible person to everyone around him. Um and in the film, so the film is it's actually it's called Still a Kid, and it's made by my childhood best friend Maxi Hachem. And that scene is very like it's very like it's such a difficult scene to watch, but it's also so, I know probably most people haven't seen it that are in here listening, but it's a scene basically of my father berating me for like 30 minutes. And um it felt like it was the first time I was able to like just see it from an outsider's perspective, like just from beyond myself. And um yeah, I don't know. I feel like with my dad, what he doesn't realize is that, like, sort of what I was explaining earlier, like it wasn't, I think he has this idea of me using him for like making photographs, when it's really about the only way I can actually have like this idea of a relationship with him is if I have my camera with me, because I can't put up with him and the situations that he puts me in unless I am able to sort of protect myself with the camera. Um, and at the end of the day, he doesn't, like, he wasn't part of the edit or anything that sort of came after making the photographs, because he doesn't even have he doesn't even have like the the will to even like, say that he's proud of me, or like just these simple things that like I feel like would bring us, closer. I think he's more on the side of just being bitter about this thing, which makes it really difficult, because obviously it would be nice if there was a way for us to bond over this thing, but he's just like incapable of doing that.
I think what you're saying brings up a lot about photography as a practice in general, about how, similarly to what Diana was saying, I think about how photography can be seen so many times as a exploitative and extractive process, and it can be in so many different places and so many different contexts. And I think what a lot of people don't see is the way that photography acts as a connector and a bridge. And I think that's what's so interesting about both of these projects is the camera is literally the bridge and the connector between emotional borders and also physical. That kind of brings me on to my next question. I'm really interested in this idea of separation, and more so a physical one. Both of you are working in the diaspora, and you're both returning to a homeland to shoot the projects. Abdul, of course, Rotting from Within is split across Berlin and Turkey, and a huge part of the book is part of your family in Turkey. And they're some of my favorite images. And you show us how your father was raised in a bid to understand him better. So tell us a bit about your relationship with Turkey and your family in Turkey. And similarly, I wanted to ask Diana about her relationship with Armenia. And I'm curious about how both of you react to the term diaspora. Do you see yourselves as diasporic photographers?
I don't really think about that word, but I think again that goes back to like me. I think because I started so young, I was just going with whatever was happening. And I think I don't the way I make work is very, again, like instinctual. So I don't think about, I think the time where it really became about thinking what did I make was afterwards. Like I make the work and then the sort of understanding comes after. Um, and for me, like making work in Turkey is so, I'm on this weird in between line because I feel so connected to these people, yet so distant. Like the way I was, I was raised in New York, and I just had a very different life than a lot of the people that I'm photographing. And I feel like there's a certain disconnect, even, you know, with feeling, I don't know. I think like a lot of my cousins and everything, they're they're inhabiting a very different space than I am in terms like they were all raised in Berlin, grew up with, my grandparents around and all these things, and I felt like I just was sort of like removed from that reality very early on. So for me, a lot of the trips of going to Turkey or in Berlin is really about trying to, reconnect with these people that knew me as a baby but have never really, seen me as an adult. And um, yeah, I yeah, I'll let Diana sort of go on.
Yeah, Diana, your book is shot entirely in Armenia. It's not shot across two or multiple places. And actually most of it is at home with your father. It's like in a domestic space. There are some landscapes. But I'm curious about how the idea of Armenian heritage plays into the work. I mean, you were born outside of the US, weren't you?
I think it's a huge part of this book. I think discovering my father was discovering this culture that we, in a way, abandoned, and we almost had to trade for an American culture and to become American. So for me, it was like discovering my dad was discovering a part of myself that felt so far away and almost forgotten. So I associate Armenia to my childhood, to my grandparents, to just these little adventures that we had as kids. And then 20 years later, to my father. It's like there's this big gap that happened in the time that we left to the time that I came back. And I've really, had to redefine my own experience in Armenia. And of course, you feel out of place. You know, you look like everyone, you know, you speak the language, you look like everyone, but it's like it's been 20 years. And I think this is why I've been so hungry to create work there, because I'm just trying to make up for that time that I didn't have and trying to spend as much time there as I can. Um, I honestly don't think it's changed. I mean, sure, it's given me, you can't say it hasn't done much, but like it's the 20 years is 20 years, you know. I think what I've learned and understood and accepted is that I'm never going to be able to do that. Like those were the core years that I didn't have. But like my relationship is so positive with the country and again with my family there that it's just honestly it's like I love going back. It's the warmest place for me.
Yeah, I like that you both reference this feeling of um, being both seen as a stranger and also feeling like a stranger whilst simultaneously feeling really comfortable around the community that you're with when you're shooting. And I think that's something that all people, you know, who have moved, who are migrants, who are in diaspora, who have mixed heritage like Abdul, that is a feeling that we all have in common, despite the fact that we all have very different identities. I mean, Diana and Abdul, your identities and the way that you relate to a place like Turkey or Armenia are so very different. But I think this feeling of both being welcome and maybe not being seen as a stranger and being obviously so distanced from a place like that is really present in the work as well. I wanted to ask, Abdul, you said something about how hearing Diana speak about the time frame and how many similarities you picked up from hearing Diana speak about father. I wanted to ask both of you what it feels like to see each other's work. Abdul, how does it feel to see Diana's work? And Diana, how does it feel to see Abdul's work? What kind of emotions does it bring up, given how similar the stories are and how similar the time frame is that you shot it in, but also just how different the work is? How did it make you feel to see all kind of a mirror, like a foggy mirror, up to your work?
I think to me, if I can lead, it's incredible, just like the parallels are incredible, but also it just goes to show you like you can put so much into a relationship and an experience, and the outcome can be not just different, but it can, I think, I found in my father a participant, you know, and my father was actively engaged with my work and really wanted to create it with me. And that changed everything. I don't know if he wasn't interested or wasn't kind, I don't think I could even move forward with it. But like I think where I admire Abdul is like he's working through tension and really this push-pull dynamic that feels so relatable, you know, maybe in different parts of life, but like it there's a mountain that you're overcoming, you know. I think for me the mountain was finding my dad. I don't think the relationship has been the mountain.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you can feel that in your work that he's very giving in a way, like even allowing you to, you know, make work with him together, like the self-portraits or the found objects or family photographs. Like you can really feel that idea of him giving. And I feel like it's it's so yeah, I mean it makes me wonder about like what would what would my work or the photographs look like if that was my reality. I don't know. That's something it's really making me think about because of how similar and different, you know, the projects are. Um, yeah, just trying to put myself in your shoes and um, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the self-portraits and Diana, your dad kind of working with you on those images of you, for example, in the kitchen, which I can bring up in a moment. Abdul, your work is a little bit more sporadic, spontaneous, perhaps a bit more emotion driven. And Father is very intentional in the way that it's a few of the images are set up. Some of them are kind of spontaneous and sporadic. Um, I think it's very telling that how each of you approach the self and the idea of form and bringing yourself into the work as well. So I wanted to ask about how you approached that feeling of bringing yourself into the work. Why include self-portraits? Why include yourself in the bodies of work? I find it very interesting that both of you decided to do that, but in very different ways. Abdul, yours is shot in lift with your dad. It's like a selfie and you can see the camera. And Diana, yours is at a breakfast table. Your dad is doing something separate. You're doing something separate, but you're on the same table together. It's an interesting way, very different ways of approaching the same kind of idea. Maybe Abdul, you could start us off.
Yeah, it's funny because there's actually an image. I don't think it's in the book, but there's this photograph that I set up. It's very similar. It's like my dad and I sitting at a table and I'm writing in my diary and he's reading the book I was reading. I don't think it's in here. You can show the one that you're talking about. Have we been showing work? No, right?
Not yet, but we can show work whilst people are asking some questions. But
You can just show the lift one.
I love it.
So, but it's funny because there's an image that's kind of like the one from Deanna's book, which is it is like us sitting together. And I think when I was putting the book together, it felt so like dishonest to the reality of our relationships. Like I don't even know. I think he maybe read the first page or like read a snippet or something, but I was able to take a photo of it. But it felt so untrue to how he actually is. Um, and I think this image, I always sort of gravitated towards it because there's this, if you go back to the photograph of my dad and I, the old one, it's like a found photo.
I'll find it. There we go.
This one. Like everyone, when they open the book, they think that's me. Like we just looked very similar with, the shaved head or whatever. And um I don't know. I feel like in that photo of us in the elevator, like that's sort of the most where I feel like I look like that.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I don't know. I have all these like in Germany, somehow he's always in these buildings where there's just an elevator in his apartment building, and it just became a way of like even there's one of my grandfather and I um in a mirror as well. And I don't know, I find it to be these moments where we're just like standing there and looking at ourselves or each other, and it's just this sort of like split moment that you have for like 10, 30 seconds or something. um and these always felt really special to me because they were these moments where we were like heading somewhere or coming back from something, something was
Mm.
happening before or after this moment that you know yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of evidence of your togetherness. It's evidence of your relationship. I mean, that's how I see it when you talk about the idea that you were either like on your way somewhere together or you're coming back from somewhere together. And the fact that you are together, it seems like you're very keen here to evidence that togetherness and the relationship. Yeah, Diana wanted to ask you the same kind of question about why include yourself in the work and why in such an intentional way as well.
I think with this series, I just remember thinking at that point, 20 years had gone by, and my dad hadn't made any images of me. So the last images he had was when I was 7. And how did he see me? Who was I even to him? And, we didn't really talk about those things those first few years. We were just like trying to spend time together. And so when we were sitting across the table from each other and I set up the camera and I asked him to take a picture and just suddenly realized I don't even know how my dad sees me. I don't even know how my dad feels. And I had him write on pictures, and I think in the book I translated one of the pictures and he said that I'm searching for the child in her, the one that I used to be close to. In myself, I'm searching for the feelings I once had for her. And going back to this idea of a relationship with two of us here and thinking how I didn't really find a father in this man. What I found is a man who experienced the same pain that I did. And here we were together finally. And how do we create something positive about that experience that we have that can be ours and it can be our takeaway? And I think this is what this book has really just been for me, is when we talk about it being selfish, it just feels a little not representative of my experience, because it wasn't really about me at the end. It was about photography serving as this what I said, as this third party to create a relationship again. It was about the two of us coming back together. So for me, these images were just a reflection of that sentiment.
Mm. Abdul, before we open up to questions, which I'm really keen to have a look at, but Abdul mentioned the word honest in regards to the diary that you said your dad was looking at. And something that I read recently that I found very interesting was that even in people's diaries, they tend to lie to themselves and they're not honest in their own diaries. And I find these two bodies of work, I mean, the fact that they are literally books as well, just feels like your own personal diaries. They feel so honest. And it doesn't, and the fact, that Abdul just said that he didn't want to edit in an image, or he didn't want to select an image that didn't feel honest to the actual relationship and wasn't representative of the real relationship that you had with your father, I think is really testament to how honest both of you are in your separate bodies of work. And that's kind of why I'm interested in this idea of you including yourselves in both works, because it brings us to a much more real place. It really grounds us in the realities that you're both living in, or that you both lived through at the time that you were making the work. I think that's a good place to open it up to questions, and we can bring photos up later as well. I'm just going to have a look at the questions here from the audience. So we've got one from Christopher. Diana, what is your perspective on the difference between estrangement and alienation from your father? And how did that perspective motivate you as a photographer? Was it a journey of discovery, or much more, an emotional delving into the depths of your own identity by learning more about your biological dad? Is that clear enough of a question?
I think so.
Should I start it from the beginning?
Yeah.
Diana, what is your perspective on the difference between estrangement and alienation from your father? And how did that perspective motivate you as a photographer?
I think for me, this was estrangement that felt out of my own control, given my story. So I think I wasn't motivated by the photography of it. I was motivated by by the relationship, just having this man in my life. Since the age of 7, I wanted to know who my dad was. I think what I said in the beginning, that photography was my almost courage. Like it, it's so scary to confront your, um, it's so scary to go through something like this. Like I remember thinking, why isn't there a guidebook or just something to help me find this person? I didn't even know where to start. And my motivation really with the book was to create something for someone else that could be helpful, because I didn't have that.
Mm. Lovely. Another question for both of you is, from Roxana, has your relationship with your father been reconstructed since developing the project? We kind of spoke a little bit about this already in terms of how your fathers feel towards the project since shooting, but maybe it's more relevant to talk about how your relationships with both of your dads have changed over the course of you publishing till today. Maybe Abdul, you could start us off.
I think my dad holds a lot of like bitterness towards me. Um, I think for him it was really difficult to like see it all laid out in a way, because he was such a terrible person to my mother and to those around him, that I think for him it's really like, I'm speaking specifically about when I had the exhibition last year in Berlin. it was sort of the first time he really got to see everything laid out, and we can pull up that image of the show. Um, and I think he so much of his idea of reality is based in trying to ignore all the wrong he has done. I think he lies to himself a lot. And um I think after the show it's carried a different kind of um yeah, I think there's a lot of resentment that he holds, which is also, very difficult, but at the end of the day, like he put my mother and I through so much, through so many terrible things that for me, this isn't about trying to make him look bad, because at the end of the day, it's not pointing a finger, but it's saying that, this is who my dad is, and this happened because of his dad and, his grandfather and so forth. Like it doesn't just end with my dad. It sort of tries to retrace everything that also happened before and that led up to this person being the way that they are. And that's sort of what I'm trying to do here in these exhibitions is it's a gathering of, family archival photographs, drawings I made as a kid when my dad was still around. Um, and then my work and sort of figuring out ways to create relationships between everything and sort of retrace the the time that was sort of, that was absent between the two of us when he wasn't around. Um, yeah.
Yeah, Diana, I wonder how you respond to the same kind of question, but also since we've talked about it a lot, maybe also you could speak on this idea of, I like that Abdul kind of ended on this idea of time, and I think that's a really something that's very powerful in both of these projects. But yeah, maybe speaking on your relationship with your father to date, and then the idea of time and how that changes a person's relationship.
I think I already answered this. I think what is interesting to me, in relation to this question is just what the future is. Now that there's no book, now that there's no film, now that there's an exhibition that's traveling, like what happens to the relationship now, um, and how does that change? Because I think so much of this has been already defined in the parameters of the book, but how does it shift and evolve and become something different, in the next 10 years? Like that's more interesting to me because I think the book is already the relationship, you know, that one chapter of it. Um,
Absolutely. I wonder how you're both going to feel towards the work in another 10 years. I mean, in retrospect, I think, obviously time changes a lot for everyone, but especially if you've made work that is so personal to you and so personal to another person as well in your life. And Abdul, you mentioned the fact that this work brings in other people in your life as well, not just you and your father, but your grandparents. Similarly to Diana, her grandfather is present in a lot of the photos as well. And your mother's, both of your mother's feelings, emotions, and journeys are present in the work, but not literally. You don't ever see your mother. I mean, I think Abdul, we see your mum once. Um, but that's something really interesting to think about as well in terms of how time changes the relationships in your life in general in regards to how you are going to now look back at this work. Yeah, and I think Diana, you said something once to me about how time doesn't necessarily heal all wounds, and I think that's something very interesting. We've got, I think, time for one more question. We've got about 5 minutes from Dean Majid. Abdul, I find that the sequencing of images in your book imitates the emotional journey you've had with your father. I would imagine that Diana's book is the same. Was that intentional in the process of making your books, or did it happen naturally? Was it difficult to revisit these emotions again as you constructed the sequence?
I can start. For me, I think like when I began making this work, I was still learning about myself as an, you know, as an image maker, and I felt like I was really exploring different cameras and different ways of seeing, and I think that is so evident if you look at the work, like the way my eye changes and the way I take in what's in front of me. And I felt like me not being truthful to that experience would just make the book feel all over the place. So I think in the end, we sort of came about it from a very uh, chronological frame of mind, and like, let's just make this like loosely chronological and really see, not only see, you know, the eye changing, but also seeing the relationship with my father change. I think that was, for me, I think like I really, for me, like, especially with this project, like for me making the work, it's really important to be honest to the experience. And I think that is such a thing that we can easily lose with photography, because it's, you know, it's like this one person's sort of viewpoint of whatever's happening. And I guess I try to limit in ways that could, you know, sort of deter from whatever the reality is. I don't know. I mean, I guess this idea of reality is sort of is non-existent either way, because it's, again, it's just made from this one person's point of view. But um I think for me, yeah, I really, in the end, I felt like it was best to just go about it in the way that I experienced these things, you know?
Yeah. Diana, I wonder if you'd like me to repeat the question for the same.
No, I got it. I think I waited a decade to make the book because I was waiting to see if the emotion would shift. And in myself, and I noticed that it wasn't and hadn't, um, and this was kind of the story. This was the story I had told myself, and this is the story that I was really telling. So I think for me, it had a natural end, right? And like, I think that's what's interesting about creating long-term work is like there is a point where you feel like you've said what you needed to say, and the relationship wasn't changing, wasn't evolving. So this was it. And like there was comfort in knowing that, because I was always waiting for it to evolve to one more, to a different space. But like I think there's something really beautiful about creating a book or an experience that is reflective of a certain point in your life, and not trying to make it something more when you don't have that more.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you both so much for joining us today. I think that was such an interesting conversation, and I learned a lot from you both. I'll hand over back to Alex just to close us out. But yeah, thanks again for everyone for joining us.
Yeah, I just want to echo thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Abdul and Diana, for your incredible generosity. Thank you, Dalia, for generating such an insightful conversation here. I hope everyone in the audience takes the opportunity to explore these two books further. A recording of this will be made available on Aperture's YouTube channel in about a week or so. And thank you all again. Thank you to our speakers, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.